research-oriented libraries. But first of all, I will explain to you what LIBE citations are exactly, because the concept may not be familiar to you all. So LIBE citations are a metric based on the presence of books in libraries. So the more times a book is held in different libraries, the higher the score will be. And this concept was introduced by two main papers in 2009, one by Torres, Salinas, and Mood, and the other one by White and others. And in the second paper, the term LIBE citations was coined as a contraction between the word librarian and the word citation. The idea being that a librarian, when they decide to acquire a book, offers a sort of citation of that book because they use their professional opinion to decide which books might be of interest to their library catalog. So since this is also part of a special track on altmetrics, I thought I'd explain how LIBE citations relate to altmetrics. Because they do not use social media mentions, Wikipedia, or other online sources that are mentions. They rather rely on the physical presence of books in libraries. So this is maybe a point of difference. But in other ways, they are like altmetrics. They also use newer data sources. For example, in our study, we used 2 library catalogs that have never been used for this purpose before. And also the indicators are a bit less well developed than the traditional citation indicators. And then lastly, this indicator is not only interesting for scholarly impact, but also for other types of impact, especially because we are using public library catalogs. We will see more impact aimed at the general audience rather than scholarly impact per se. So why study these LIBE citations? They're mainly interesting for books, which are publications that are more difficult to study through citation analysis, but also in particular for books written in a local language. So in our case, we're using a Flemish database with Dutch language books mainly. That's also a reason to use LIBE citations. And then lastly, also for the non-scholarly outputs, books aimed at a wider audience. So the research goal is mainly to study whether these public library catalogs can be a useful source for a LIBE citation analysis. We will check the coverage of social sciences and humanities books in public libraries, and also look at what types of books are most present in the public libraries. And then secondly, we are also going to take a look at the selection of books that are public library bestsellers, so the books that score really well in public libraries. Our data sources are the following. First, we have data from UNICAT. This is a Belgian catalog of research-oriented libraries. So it holds both university libraries, but also museum collections and some government collections. And then secondly, we also have data from Cultuurconnect. This is a public library catalog from Flanders. It holds the library collections of all public libraries in Flanders, so all village libraries, towns libraries that are freely accessible to the public. And then lastly, we also have input data that we get from VABB. This is the Flemish research database for publications from the social sciences and humanities. It is also used for a performance-based research funding system. So Flemish universities, they send in the data about all the social sciences and humanities publications by their researchers. So this is an overview of this data. We have 46,000 or more than 46,000 ISBNs from VABB. There is also a link to the Zenodo if you want to use this database. And these were then used for the retrieval in the 2 library catalogs. For the public library catalog, we have a holding percentage of 18%. So that's not a lot. So only 18% of books from social sciences and humanities researchers in Flanders are actually held in one of the public libraries. For the research libraries, this percentage is much higher, with 55% of books actually being held. And then if we look at what library, like how many libraries are present in each of these catalogs, we see that with the research catalog, there are 78 different libraries in our data set. But with public libraries, these books are spread out over 639 libraries, so a much higher number. And this also has implications for how high a LIBE citation score can be. So if we look here at the box plot, we see that for the public libraries, the maximum score, the live citation score, just based on how many different libraries a book is held in, can be much higher, can run up to a few hundred libraries, and this is much lower for the research-oriented libraries. But with both catalogs, we see also that most books are held only in a few libraries, and then there are some books that are held in very many different libraries. And later on in the presentation, I will zoom in on those books that are held in very many public libraries, the public library bestsellers. So we can see here on this figure a difference also between the scholarly books and the non-scholarly books, because our database distinguishes between these two types of books for the reason that it's used for the performance-based research funding system. So the peer-reviewed ones are the ones that count in the research funding, and the non-peer-reviewed ones are the ones that don't count. And we see here that with the public libraries in particular, 88% of the books that are present there from our social science and humanities researchers are non-peer-reviewed. So they fall outside of the research funding system, and they are generally books aimed at a more broader audience. For the research libraries, this number is a bit lower. And then the green bar is our baseline from the social sciences and humanities database. Also comparing the holding counts, so in how many different libraries are they held on average, we also see for the non-peer-reviewed ones, on average, slightly higher holding counts. We also looked at the distribution of languages because we were in particular interested in the Dutch language books, local language publications, and we see that compared to our general database with the public libraries, there are a lot more books in Dutch, in the local language, and a lot fewer books in English. So books that are present in the public libraries are mostly written in the local language. And then we also see French and German featured here. This is due to the fact probably that Belgium has 3 official languages, so also French and German are a part of this. So a short preliminary conclusion. The research-oriented libraries offer better coverage, 55% versus 18%. And both the holdings from the public libraries and from the research-oriented libraries are interesting for books that are not peer-reviewed because they hold very many of those. And the public live citations are also especially interesting for books in the local language. As I promised, we will take a look at the public library bestsellers, so the books that are held the most in the public libraries. And because these are fewer books, we were able to look at each of them individually, look them up and see what type of contribution by a social science and humanities scholar these represent. And we try to create a sort of typology from this. So we basically distinguish between 2 roles that the social science or humanities scholar has. The one is a supporting role and the other is a role as an author. So among the supporting role, we see that there are dictionaries or compilations present. So this is not a scholar who writes an entire book, but rather someone who contributes as an editor or as a contributor. Then we also have literary works. So in public libraries, literary works from famous writers from Flemish literary history are present, and critical editions of these are sometimes edited by scholars from, in particular, the humanities, but also provided with a preface by people from social sciences or humanities. And then on the other hand, we also have the works where the scholar is the author of the work. And these we distinguish between, on the one hand, general popularizations, and on the other hand, books by public intellectuals. The difference is not a hard difference to make. It's more of a soft difference, a scale, I guess. But the general popularizations may be books about history, in particular Belgian history in this case, of the First World War and the Second World War are quite popular, but also other types of popularizations of books aimed at broader audiences. And the books by public intellectuals, we set them apart because they are written by people who are generally well known to the public. They may write even more than one public library bestseller, and they draw on their expertise as scholars, but they also venture more broadly into societal criticism and more broad topics. And looking a little bit more at these people, They look like this. So they are generally well-known names, not to you, but to a Flemish audience. They might be well-known because they also appear in other media sources. They might also be the people that are asked to write opinion pieces in a newspaper or even appear on television. They also hold senior positions, so they're a bit later on in their career, and in this case they're also usually male. So last question is, how can we use these public LIBE citations? So what we saw is that there are very high scores for a couple of academics that even appear more than once among the public library bestsellers, but then also very low scores for most. As we saw, most books are not even held in a single public library. So a problem with this is that arguably this could also be based a little bit on luck. The scholar who is contributing as an editor to an important piece of literature is not really responsible for this book being held in many different libraries. And so it's not always easy to attribute the high scores to the work of the SSH scholar. But secondly, the LIBE citations are also clearly indicating an important aspect of social sciences and humanities engagement with the public. They point towards activities that are important, like editing literary masterpieces, but also a distribution of their knowledge as scholars to a broader audience. And the books with high public LIBE citation scores, if nothing else, they are widely available to the public and they are more visible than the books that are not in the libraries. So these public LIBE citation scores, I would argue, can also raise attention to the activities of scholars that are not part of their peer-to-peer communication. And this may be especially important for social sciences and humanities. And a last point to make here is that the study shows that it's important to be aware of the types of libraries present in the catalog used. So the types of libraries can also have an effect on how high the LIBE citations are, and local catalogs in particular can be used for local language books. Lastly, some challenges. We depend here on the data from the library catalogs, which may not always be very accurate. So a lot of data cleaning was needed to deduplicate and to make sure that we could use this data. And also one of the main criticisms that we haven't really been able to address is that books can be acquired in bulk or donated. And then lastly, we would really love to have also data about the loan statistics, but we don't have this data at the moment, but this would be able to show how many times books are actually being loaned from the libraries, so the actual usage of the books. So thank you very much for